Well, good afternoon. My name is David Jackett. I am the Director of Mobilization and Operations for 1615. If you are looking forward to hearing the lovely voice of Matthew Ellison, he is not with us today. He is teaching another online class, and so I will be your co-host for today. Just wanted to let you know about a few resources that we have available to you from 1615. When Everything is Missions, if you have not heard about these two books written by Matthew Ellison and Denny Spitters, we highly recommend you check those out. If you've been on one of our webinars before, we've added a handy little QR code down in the corner for some of these resources, so you can easily just use your phone on your camera and scan, and it'll go to those websites instead of having to scribble down these websites as we share them with you. But we highly recommend these two books talking about the question, when everything is missions. Is everyone a missionary, and is every good work we do in the Lord's name a missions work? And so highly recommend you check those out. We also have a podcast. We have 2 seasons up currently, talking about when everything is missions. The current season has been interviewing contributors from the second book, Conversations on When Everything is Missions. So highly recommend you check those out wherever you listen to your podcast. They're available on pretty much every platform you can imagine. The Mission Table. We currently have 3 seasons of the Mission Table up. You can watch those at missiontable.org, or you can find those on YouTube. Current mission topics and trends debated by an engaging panel of speakers, and we're excited that we are in the current development of season 4, and hopefully that'll be released next year. But recommend you check 3 seasons, lots of great episodes, lots of great topics. We also have an extensive video library on our website and also on our YouTube channel. So whether you like to watch online on a website or check out our YouTube, please go and subscribe there. This webinar will also be recorded and also will be released on our YouTube channel here in about a week. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between Missio Nexus and 1615. Matthew Ellison and Ted Essler interview guests each month talking about different topics related to the mission that we find ourselves in and the reality that our mission matters. The Mobilize Church is an interactive workshop that we have developed and have been doing for a couple of years now. We have an in-person workshop coming up in November. That'll be in Dallas, Fort Worth. Registration is currently open. And then we also have an 8-week virtual workshop that'll be every Tuesday for 8 weeks, starting Tuesday, October 5th. We'll meet about 90 minutes each week. This is a great workshop for church mission leaders to come and really explore keys to unlocking your church's missions potential. If your church is asking questions about how do we grow in our global vision, how do we become more strategic, more engaged, how do we involve our whole congregation in the mission of God, any of these questions that stand out to you, we highly recommend the Mobilize Church Workshop. The workshop is sponsored by some amazing organizations you see down there at the bottom, and many of those orgs also have speakers that join us for the workshop. So highly recommend you checking that out. Another collaboration with Missio Nexus is the peer-to-peer virtual gatherings. This happens each month. Next month, Rebecca from Cafe1040 and Savannah Kimberlin with Barna will be discussing a little bit more further and in depth, building on some research that Barna has done recently about mobilizing Generation Z. So you'll want to tune into that if you're a church staff, church pastor, mission leader. You'll definitely want to check out that opportunity. We've got 3 upcoming webinars to finish out our year. Next month, we'll continue our Mobilizing People of Color series. We have partnered with OMF, and we'll be talking about mobilizing the Asian American Church. The following month, we will be working with IRC, the International Rescue Committee. We'll be talking about the truths and myths of refugee resettlement. This will not be a political topic, we will strictly stick to the facts of information that is so important for us as the church to know about refugee resettlement and what kind of information is out there. IRC does a phenomenal job of teaching on this, and so we're excited to have them. And then the next month, we'll be joined by Dick Brogdon with Live Dead, and we'll be talking about safety first, how our love affair with safety keeps us from world missions and what to do about it. That's going to be a really, really great topic. So you can sign up for those at 1615.org/events. So today we're talking about mobilizing the next generation, and we're excited to be joined by Cafe1040. Our guest today is Justin, who is the Interim Director of Mobilization. Such an honor to have Justin with us. Justin and I have been good friends for many years. Up until recently, we shared a wall. Our offices were next to each other. So I've known this brother and also have partnered with Cafe for many, many years. And they are doing phenomenal work with the next generation. Before we get started, your phones have been muted to preserve sound quality. You can listen through your computer speakers, or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind, please type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We will be addressing questions for the last 15 to 20 minutes of our time together. So if you're thinking already, what are some challenges? What are some things that you're facing in mobilizing the next generation? Go ahead and type those in, or as you think about things as Justin's talking today, make sure to type in those questions and we'll address those at the end. Over 130 people have registered for today's live webinar. The webinar is also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org or available on our YouTube channel within the next week. I'm now going to turn it over to Justin. Give me just a second and we'll let me do the handoff here. But Justin, if you want to go ahead and turn on your camera, and then I'm going to hand this over to you and you should be good to go.
Excellent. Let's see. Well, good afternoon, morning to some. It's a pleasure to be here. Very honored to come speak and very encouraged to see the number of attendees that we have that are interested in what it looks like to mobilize the next generation. Let's see what this next slide, if I can do the next slide here. There we go. Okay. Well, when talking about mobilizing the next generation, I think the first thing that we need to talk about is, first off, why are we talking about this? Who are we talking about? And then what should we do about this? So just to start, why are we talking about this? This would be pretty short, but as the global population rises, so rises the need for more workers throughout the world. That's not news to anyone, nor should it be surprising to anyone. COVID opened a new set of doors, however. The number of workers that I've heard of that have been pulled from the field due to COVID, that have begun to decide to remain stateside, has also been growing, thus increasing the need for new workers all the more. So my assumption is that if you're tuning in, you're aware of this growing need and agree that the next generation. Oh, got a little feedback there. Okay, I think we're good. So my assumption is that if you're tuning in, you're aware of this growing need and agree that the next generation of workers is coming from the literal next generation. So I think there only remains two questions. Who are we talking about and what should we do about it? So let's start with who we're talking about. Know your audience, know your enemy, know a bit about the person sitting across the table from you. However you want to think about it, the starting point to mobilizing the next generation has to be knowing a little bit about them, recognizing your differences and seeing their strengths. To be honest, there are a lot of great in-depth studies around Gen Z, and I wouldn't do them service to try and recreate them. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of who we're talking about. If you want to look more in depth into who Gen Z is, there's some great resources, great studies out there put out by people like Barna. So feel free to dive into those, and they're absolutely phenomenal. But as a brief overview, who are we talking about? Just some key points that we need to keep in mind as we discuss this. First, Due to Gen X being post-Christian, Gen Z may have little to no knowledge of the need for long-term workers or the unreached people groups or the disparity of workers, and that the mass majority of overseas missionaries do not go into unreached people groups, but go to already reached places in the world. The second thing that we need to keep in mind is that they are very globally minded. These people this generation has lived in an era where the internet wasn't just invented, but it was in their pockets all the time. And so it's shrunk the size of the world. So they're very globally minded, being aware of everything that's going on. Secondly, they have a strong sense of self-direction, an entrepreneurial spirit. They want to, I think it's 70% of high school students say that they want to own their own business when they grow up. That's a dramatic shift from previous generations. And so they just have this entrepreneurial spirit that they want to start something, own something. They want to drive that. So it's a very strong sense of self-direction. The next is that they're extremely resourceful. In growing up with, once again, the internet in their pocket. Oh. David, do you have control of the screen again?
I don't think so. Maybe I clicked it. Sorry.
No, you're good. I just want to see where we're at. But they're extremely resourceful. So this is a generation that if they have a problem that they need solved, they know how to find the answer to that problem. They know where to look. They're quick to adopt new methodologies to make things happen. They're quick to learn new skills, new trades, new abilities, because it's available to them. And it's always been for their entire lives, literally at their fingertips, on their phones, on their laptops, on their tablets. They also, as you see here, they desire to make a difference. They want to be the founders of a new world. They want their lives to be impactful. They want to not just go through the day to day, but they want their lives to mean something. So they desire to make a difference. I think I actually did lose control of this. Is there a way to hand that back? Oh, got it now. Somebody's got it. Whoever clicked it, appreciate you. They're also very skilled multitaskers. They're able to shift between, and what I mean by that, they're able to shift between work and play very quickly. They're just used to being hit with a lot of different information and having to go from one thing to the next very, very quickly. So they adapted to that. They're used to being multitaskers and getting multiple things done at the same time. So they're very skilled at it. Let's see, this is not, there we go. They also expect loyalty. And what I mean by that is that they want to feel appreciated. If you take into account that they desire to make a difference, they want to know that what they're doing is appreciated. Don't hear me say that that Gen Z just always needs a pat on the back, that they can't take negative criticism or anything of that nature, but they want to know that whomever they're working for or working with is appreciating what they have to bring to the table. And so they expect loyalty. And then they also, they're all very much unique people. They're all individuals, but they have a strong need for community as well. And recognition of individuality is important to them. So that's kind of who we're talking about. When we're talking about Gen Z, these are some key traits that are common throughout members of Gen Z. So what should we do about this? Let me also preface this by saying that some of these are blanket statements, so you might not find to be true for some, even though they are true for others. So view these as tools in a tool belt and not silver bullets. So let's take first things first. Gen Z may have little to no knowledge of the need for workers. This doesn't mean that they aren't good candidates to go overseas, but what we have to realize is that there may be a few extra steps in their preparation, or even in them gaining interest. Gen Z is a passionate generation. I have a multitude of Gen Z that work for me, and I can honestly say that while they are all passionate about mobilization, they have a wide variety of passions that are all unique and different. And I know that some of them are listening right now and they're going to roll their eyes at this, but truthfully, sometimes their passions are trivial, in my opinion, but they are extremely passionate about these things. And it's very difficult to be passionate about something that you are unaware of. So taking the time to help them see the need can spark a passion inside of them that can drive them to extraordinary heights. Because they grow up with the internet in their pockets, the world already feels much smaller than it has in generations before. All that needs to happen is to shed a light on the darkness throughout the world. And so taking the reality that they possibly have little to no knowledge of the need, and yet they are aware, they are globally minded. If we combine a knowledge of the need with the knowledge that they already have to be globally minded, we have the potential for an extreme passion for missions. Like I said, I have quite a few Gen Z that work for me, and their passion for missions runs deep and is very impressive. And to be honest, extremely exciting for me to see that within them. The next is combining their entrepreneurial spirit and their resourcefulness, and you have an individual that wants to start something new and can figure out what they need to accomplish that task. This is a generation that grew up with the internet in their pocket and can and do use it to learn new skills and find solutions to problems that they run into. Helping them find a place in missions that they can stretch their legs opens that door to use their skills for a greater purpose. So when we're talking about bringing a member of the Gen Z into a team, you're looking at somebody who wants to start something, that wants to make some form of impact and can figure out how to do it, which makes them, especially on the field, an incredibly impactful team member. The number of issues that arise while on the field, if you're aware of missions to any extent, you can only imagine. And the ability to overcome or find solutions to those problems is an extremely helpful and impactful tool. And so they can become very impactful team members to any overseas team. This plays into their desire to make a difference along with their skills and their multitasking. They saw their grandparents and their parents go to work day in and day out and are interested in pursuing their passions instead of getting a job with a cubicle. They dream big. They've bought into the idea that each individual can make an impact. And to be honest, that's not a wrong idea, especially when it comes to missions. They may not be a church planter that ends up planting thousands of churches, but if we're thinking on a kingdom scale, if they are in the field and they desire to make a difference and they are skilled multitaskers that can bounce from work and play or tasks and relationships, then you have a very dynamic worker who can impact the kingdom in profound ways by bringing people into the kingdom, by building those relationships while also accomplishing the tasks that need to be done to be effective workers on a team. So their desire to make a difference, plus their skilled multitasking, man, they are dynamic workers. And then the biggest part in my experience is loyalty. They want to feel as though they're a contributing member of a team and that contribution is appreciated. For Gen Z, loyalty received is loyalty given. Remember that at a high level, they may just be a cog in the machine, But every cog is an important cog with unique skills, unique thoughts, and unique strengths. Now, this comes with inherent risks. What I mean is this: utilize them and give them an opportunity to lead or to shine. They might surprise you, but they might also fail. But you know what? Failure is a great teacher, and the lesson won't be lost. Give them the opportunity to succeed or fail, and coach them through both. In the earlier stages of mobilization, this empowerment gives them the confidence to take the next step towards long-term work, and coaching them throughout successes and failures ingrains the reality that you care about them more than you care about the results. And when we think about the reality of it, investing into the individual will, in time, yield results. I know that can sound a bit scary, but taking those opportunities develops them and develops a stickiness to them so that the end result will be worth the time spent developing. Mobilization is it's an interesting game to play. So I have two kids, an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. A few weeks ago, we took the afternoon to play some board games, and we obviously had to choose some games that a 4-year-old could play, so we landed on Candyland and Chutes and Ladders. I don't know the last time you played those two games, but they're similar with a clearly defined start and a clearly defined end, but they provide two very different experiences while playing. We want Mobilizing to be like Candyland. It's a straight shot. It's a pretty quick game, and it's nearly always forward movement, unless you're really far in the game and pull a very unfortunate card. The reality is that mobilization is far more like Chutes and Ladders. You can take 4 steps forward, hit a ladder, and all of a sudden you're on square 14. You take 2 steps forward and you hit a chute, and that chute takes you all the way back down to square 6. And if you're anything like my daughter, you hit the same dadgum chute multiple times, and it keeps taking you back to square 11. It takes forever and can be really exhilarating when you hit a big ladder, and really frustrating and defeating when you hit a chute. More often than not, we want a Candyland experience and find ourselves in a Chutes and Ladder experience. So what do? Do we quit the game? To be honest, that's an option. You can start with a young adult, and when you help them to see the disparity of workers and the need of unreached people groups with little or no access to the gospel, you can ascend a ladder and they can get excited and you can move forward at a dead sprint, but then something happens and they regress. You can cut bait at that point and start back at scouting and the recruiting rigmarole. My suggestion is that you stay faithful. We want a Candyland experience because it's efficient, it's clear cut, it's clearly defined, and you know where you're headed. But the reality is that we are not dealing with programs, we're dealing with people. And when we're dealing with people, whether they be Gen Z or any other generation, it's not a straight shot. Stick with it. Continue moving forward. Celebrate the ladders. Coach through the chutes. Yes, it can be frustrating. Yes, it can take time. Yes, it can be exhausting and defeating at times. But what I can tell you is that those that also stick with it become great candidates for long-term overseas work. Now, at this point, you may be saying that, or maybe thinking that everything that I'm talking about, when I'm talking about what should we do about this, sounds a little bit like a sales pitch about Gen Z, and that I'm trying to sell you on their worthiness, their validity, about how they're great candidates, they're dynamic workers, they're fantastic team members, that they have an entrepreneurial spirit and they're resourceful, and that if you give them loyalty, they'll give loyalty in return. And here's the reality. it is a bit of a sales pitch. I am trying to help you to see that Gen Z can be an extremely frustrating generation. And I guarantee that generations before us looked at our generation and said the same thing about us. But what I've come to see about Gen Z is that if we see their value, and not just that we need people, but that they are valuable and that they are assets that are going to add to our organizations, then that is exactly what you'll get. You will get resources. You will get a positive impact on your organization. And if you want to talk about mobilizing the next generation, the best way to do it is to believe in them, is to see them as valuable, not just numbers that you need out in the field, but that the person sitting across the table from you is somebody that you want on your team, that you want in your organization, because they bring value. Yes, the generation is different than yours. Yes, Gen Z is different than my generation. But that doesn't mean that it's a wrong generation or that it's a bad generation. It's a different generation. And I think, this is just me, but I think that God has created the body of Christ with different members in different giftings, different skill sets, in different ways to help us improve one another, to help us move the gospel to places where it's not present, to take the glory of God where it's never been before, and to see the kingdom in all its fullness and all its glory, that worship might be had throughout all the world. But that means dealing with people that are different. And it's their differences from ourselves that actually make the bride more beautiful. So how do you mobilize the next generation? Believe in them. Take the time. They're worth the investment. Encourage them in the ladders. Be with them and don't cut bait when you hit a shoot. Know that it's all part of the process and that it's worth taking the time, the intentionality, the patience, and the frustrations. I think in 10 years, we're going to be really shocked in a very positive way on the impact that Gen Z has on the world for the sake of Christ. Mobilization is a series of progressions, regressions, triumphs, and frustrations. Faithfulness to the process is the key to successful mobilization of a young adult. That's all I got. Love to open it up to any questions that anybody has, anything that I said that may frustrate you, or just raise questions.
Yeah, so before we start with questions, Justin, and I should have encouraged you to do this at the beginning, there may be some people here that aren't as familiar with Cafe 1040 as others. So you mentioned you work a lot with Gen Z. Tell us more about Cafe 1040 and how you guys are directly leading and mobilizing the next generation.
Yeah, of course, that's my fault. I should have thought about that. Give you guys a little bit of background of myself. I am the interim director of mobilization for Cafe 1040. The mission of Cafe 1040 is to mobilize the next generation to tell a story of Jesus where it's never been told. Our vision for our ministry is to see disciples of every people group. So we do this in a couple of different ways, mobilizing the next generation to tell the story of Jesus where it's never been told. Kind of our bread and butter, our key thing, one of the main things that we do is we run an overseas missions mentorship program inside unreached people groups. It's a 3-month mentorship where we take young adults overseas and they get mentored through the process of what it looks like to live in a cross-cultural context with the intentionality of taking the gospel where it's never been before. This has a few key parts to it, but we do believe very deeply in experiential learning. So there is a section of the program that is a bit of a classroom type setting. Now, keep in mind that we're talking about being in North Africa, Southeast Asia, and up in Europe amongst the diaspora people. So when I say classroom, please don't think college classroom. Think more of a living room with the shades drawn. Within those, we teach young adults about the biblical basis for missions, different missions methodologies, about the culture that they're in, the predominant religion, whether it be Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, animism, so that they're aware of what they're being surrounded by. We talk them through how to share the gospel in a safe and sustainable way, how to get from point A to point B using their public transportation. We teach them language acquisition skills. We teach them how to buy food in the market when you don't speak the language. The way that everything is structured is that our program participants all the guys live in one apartment complex, all the girls live in another apartment complex, and all of our missionaries live apart from them in a different apartment complex. So they do not live with our missionaries. So they are living life as an adult in a cross-cultural setting and having to do a lot of things that regular adults would have to do just in a different cultural context setting. And so we teach them how to do all of these things. And then the bulk of their experience is taking what they've learned and putting it into practice. So we've taught them about the culture. They need to go out into the culture, engage it, and make friends. We've taught them how to buy food in the market when they don't speak the language. Well, you got to eat. So go buy some groceries, figure out how to cook the food. We teach them how to get from point A to point B using public transportation, that specific type of public transportation. Well, we're going to go on an adventure. Meet us there. So they've got to figure out how to get there. We've taught them how to share the gospel in a safe and sustainable fashion. And once they've built those relationships with the culture around them, in certain circumstances, they are encouraged to share the gospel with people who have never heard it before. And so while they're getting all of these experiences and while they're going through culture shock and while there's conflict within the team because you're in a different cultural context with people that you don't really know, we coach them through it. We mentor them through the entire process. And our hope and our goal in that is that they would gain clarity in their calling as to whether they're called to live overseas long-term for the sake of the gospel or not. And then also gain the confidence that they could live overseas if they were called to do so. It's 3 months on purpose. 2 weeks you can get in and out, and it's just a really fun trip. In 3 months, you go through the entire gamut of culture shock, homesickness, and starting to feel like this is home now. This is where you live. And then all of a sudden, you become very comfortable living in that context. So they gain that confidence. The other side of what we do is mobilization here stateside. We meet with young adults, we meet with churches, we meet with other organizations to help those churches and organizations create mobilization strategies for their congregations or those that they come in contact with. And for young adults, our goal is to help them find their next best step towards fulfilling the Great Commission, doing what the Lord has called us to do, whether it be, to be quite honest and frank, overseas missions or not. We want to expose them and inform them and all of that to, the disparity of workers, unreached people groups, the 1040 window, the need for people to go overseas. But we're also very comfortable with the reality that God has not called every single individual to go overseas long term, but that we can all play a role and need to and should play a role in missions in general, whether it be going, if you're called to go overseas, whether it be sending, whether it be praying for unreached people groups and workers that are overseas, whether it be welcoming the nations that are coming here, because that's a reality as well. There are millions that are coming here. At the same time, there are billions that are still over there. So we don't want to neglect overseas just because people are coming here. And then also, you can mobilize. So once you have the information and you know and you're aware of unreached people groups, the disparity of workers, the disparity of finances that are going to unreached people groups and workers in that field, and once you're aware of the 1040 window and everything there, if you do not feel called to go overseas long term, you can tell somebody else about it. You can raise awareness of what we have been called in to participate in with what God is doing across the world. And this is my belief, and if you want to argue me on it, we can have a call later. But when Jesus says that he came to bring life and life to the full, man, I truly believe the fullest life that we could possibly live is participating in what God is doing, both at home and abroad, whether it be going, staying, mobilizing, praying, welcoming, or sending. And so finding our role in that and helping young adults take their next best step to full participation in the Great Commission is really what we're geared toward as mobilizers for Cafe 1040. So that's kind of what we do in a very brief nutshell.
Yeah, that was good. Thanks for sharing that. So we've got quite a few questions, so we'll get through these and let you hammer out. So the first one is from Melissa. She says Gen Z seems fearful of deciding on anything. Any suggestions for booting them out of indecision?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me also preface this. I am not a psychologist. I am not a sociologist. I have not done the in-depth research that I could point to this research paper or this study group or anything of that nature. But what I do know is that people who are much smarter than me that are into psychology and are into sociology have pointed to something that is kind of referred to as the paralysis of options. When you have a table full of options, it is very difficult to choose one because of the accessibility. I think there are a couple key factors. The accessibility of information from the internet and having it in your pocket, as well as and I don't mean this in a negative term in this sense, but the American dream of you can do whatever you want to do. All you got to do is work hard and you can have it. What that means is that you can choose anything, and that creates a paralysis of options. And so how do you get them beyond that? You don't throw the options at them and say, which would you like, but you walk through it with them. You coach them. You ask intentional questions. You help lead them through their options to find what they're passionate about, what they're skilled at, things that they are interested in, and then you help them narrow that down to fewer options. And whenever it's fewer options, it's much easier to decide. A really easy example, if you're married, you know this. The question of, what do you want to eat for dinner? And the answer is always, I don't know, I'm cool with anything. Is that ever true? It's never true. Like, I'm not cool with everything or anything. And so what happens whenever you go, would you like Mexican food, Chinese, or Indian food? Well, now I'll choose one. There's not a paralysis of options, even though it's something as simple as, what do you want for dinner? Limiting the options gives us something that we can actually choose from. And I think that's what Gen Z experiences just on a larger scale, because they have an unlimited option at a larger scale.
Yeah, that's good. So let's see, this is from Mark. Where do Gen Z tend to congregate? Are there online other locations that have concentrations of Gen Z traffic?
Mark, that's a really good question. I think there are a couple different answers in different situations. Online, they don't use the same social platforms as frequently as the previous generation, but they are still fairly active on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Twitter is not quite as popular as it once was with Gen Z, but those are probably your top hits, and I wouldn't say that that's in order of importance. But I would say, yeah, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook is still pretty prevalent. As far as in person, I can speak from our experience. We go to colleges because when you're talking about the next generation, there's a lot of next generation in colleges. Other places, coffee shops. I mean, don't go to the mall. I don't even know if I know a single Gen Z that goes to a mall, or if they even know what a mall is. That may be, malls may be outdated. I don't know. To be totally honest, I mean, I'm 34 and I couldn't tell you last time I was at the mall. But you find a lot in coffee shops. They and I think this is fun. They like, not, I don't want to say they like the finer things in life, but they like the unique things in life. So, and I wouldn't say go and recruit them here, but just thinking about Gen Z, local restaurants are more appealing than chain because it's unique. They're a generation of unique. They individually are unique. They want their uniqueness to be recognized. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I think it should be. I think we need to be really good at recognizing how each member of the body is different and unique, and celebrate those unique differences. But they are far more interested in local places than they are chain. I don't know if that answers your question, Mark.
Sounded good to me.
Okay.
You sound like you know what you're talking about.
Good. Good. Until I make it.
So David asks, what is, not me, but another David, what is a good mentoring book or resource for walking someone through the process of ministry or missions?
Yeah, you know what? A really good book that I've read and that we use for all of our stateside mentors, our overseas mentors. We actually took our mobilization team through it as well. It's called The Coach Model. Man, I wish I could tell you the author of that, and if it was sitting next to me, I could. But The Coach Model is a really, really good resource for learning how to coach somebody rather than direct somebody. I've done this. I will sit somebody down and I will tell them my plan for their life. It worked once, and that was neat that it worked. And she's on my team now, and she's fantastic. But typically that doesn't work. Telling somebody your plan for their life doesn't really work, whether it's direct or indirect. But the coach model leads us to ask powerful questions that helps them to discover their plan, or rather God's plan for their life. And so it's a really good book. It is Christian oriented. So there are some sections in there that is, praying what the Holy Spirit might be telling them and how to ask questions to uncover that. But that's a book that I highly, highly recommend. If you are willing to take the time to walk along somebody and coach them through things, man, dig into the coach model. It's a good book. It's not super long. Highly recommend it.
Is that Keith Webb? Is that the one you're talking about?
That's it,
okay.
Keith.
I wanted to make sure that was correct before I shared that out with the entire audience.
Yeah, for sure.
So perfectly. Let's see. Someone named Alex asks, what are some common barriers that Gen Z will face going overseas?
Man, that is also a really good question. Some common barriers are going to be some common barriers that all of us will experience. A shifting in culture, just the culture shock of everything could be pretty dramatic. We have to realize that there are some strengths to the Western American culture that can also be weaknesses when we talk about cross-cultural work. So when we're talking about culture shock, there will just be the plain general, and I don't mean to downplay it, but the plain and general culture shock of it just being a radically different culture. Another one is you are the foreigner that nobody is really going to celebrate. Our culture is built in hey, you could be the president if you wanted to be. And you take that overseas, you take that mindset overseas, that's not going to fly. Nobody really nobody's going to celebrate you the way that they do here in this culture. And so that'll be it. The deprivation of comforts is going to be, because once again, we live in a very comfortable culture. But the deprivation of comforts is going to be a barrier. They are extremely resourceful, and they know how to function in our society and our culture. You take them overseas, everything changes. Literally everything changes. And so getting used to that and adapting to that, it's going to be a barrier, not one that can't be overcome, but it is a barrier. And then the fear of the unknown. When you go into a different culture, there's a lot of unknowns. And I think we all exist in some degree of the fear of the unknown. Whether it be paralyzing or not is a completely different conversation. But when you go into another culture, pretty much everything at that point is unknown. And so overcoming that fear, and that's part of why, and this, I don't mean this to be a Cafe 1040 plug, but it's a little bit of a Cafe 1040 plug. That's why we have them over there for 3 months. That's why our program exists, to help them address the fear of the unknown, walk them through it, coach them through it, mentor them through it, so that the unknown does not become paralyzing, but something that they instead just adapt to and learn how to function in. Because they're resourceful, they can learn it, but that doesn't mean that it's not scary at first. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, that's understandable and not, you know, cowardly, for the lack of a better term, for them to be scared of the unknown. So I think those are some barriers moving overseas. And then a major one also is this what I'm supposed to be doing with my life? Once again, the paralysis of options comes into play, and making a long-term commitment to overseas without really knowing whether they're called to that or not is going to stop them.
Yeah,
I think it's.
Yeah, so here's a great question. It's been phrased and kind of, there's been statements and questions around this, but it's around essentially the idea of retaining, but also people have phrased it in regards to loyalty. It seems like people are struggling to retain Gen Z workers and potential candidates. And so a lot of people have kind of asked about the loyalty being a really curious idea, is that they're kind of known for loyalty, but there's seems to be a lot of problems with retaining Gen Z. So what are good ways to retain Gen Z? This person specifically said, we've had problems in other areas of our work with Gen Z quitting part way through. And then other people have said they don't typically stay within a career field or a job position for a long period of time. So what are ways that you guys have seen that, the good or the bad?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good point, a good thing to bring up. Gen Z usually has more careers or jobs in a shorter amount of time than, you know, previous generations have had in their entire existence. And I think part of that is because they're so resourceful, they're able to learn new skills and then want to try it out. There's a lot of interest in it. So I see two kind of questions there to be answered. One is the loyalty one, and then the other is why do they keep jumping around? And I think they keep jumping around. It's I don't mean to point fingers anywhere. I just observations and my thoughts. We live in an entertainment society, and we have trained ourselves to have short attention spans. There are negative sides to that, obviously, but there are also positives in a weird sense. And I think part of the positive is that they have the ability to switch in between work and play, or task and relationship very quickly. So that's a positive that's coming out of it. A negative is they may want to move on and try something new. A solution, once again, remember, these are not silver bullets, just potential tools in a tool belt. I think a solution is to make sure that it's not, hammer this nail over and over and over again for the next 10 years. But when an idea comes up, let them explore it. Give them the opportunity to try something new within that context. It may work out. It may not, but it's something new. And so give them the opportunity to try something new. And then as far as the loyalty is concerned, I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. I am not saying that they're an extremely loyal generation as though they're golden retrievers and, you can do whatever you want and they are just super loyal. No, loyalty is extremely important to them. And so if you give loyalty, you will get loyalty. And what does that look like? I think that for Generation Z, it is acknowledging and not just a simple nod, but really acknowledging, being quick to praise things that they're doing well. And so this is my kind of personality. I will give out compliments when compliments are due. But I'm also looking for reasons to give compliments. And so it's not, I don't want to fluff people up. I don't want to just candy coat everything and it's all sunshines and rainbows and nobody does anything wrong and you're all just amazing all the time. I think that's fruitless, and I think that Gen Z will see through that. And it's pointless, and that would become unauthentic, and it'll do more harm than good as far as like retention and gaining that loyalty from them. But find reasons to give compliments. Tell them that they're doing a good job. Tell them that they're an asset to not just their team, but the organization as a whole. Once again, I don't think it's a silver bullet that if you do that, then man, they'll stick with you till the end of their days. But I think that will garner some loyalty, and relationship is also really important to them. So they are individuals, but they crave community. So another phrase of community is relationship, not just a bunch of people together, but deep relationship. So are you taking the time to pour yourself into them and allowing them to pour into you? Not saying that you've got to like sit down with a Bible study and have them lead it or anything like that. If they're not there, then they're not there. That's okay. But when are you actually interested in their life? Like actually interested? Are you allowing them space to talk about what they feel is important, whether you do or not? I've got a team member that's extremely passionate about something that I think is extremely trivial. That doesn't mean that when he starts talking about it, I shut him down. I want to hear about it. I'm just probably not going to pursue that passion because I'm not passionate about it. And so are you allowing them that space to build into that relationship? I think for Gen Z, the relationship aspect is where that loyalty is really driven into, and it's difficult for them to walk away from a really good relationship. And it's very easy for them to walk away from a relationship that is not. If there are no roots in that relationship, then it's an easy plant to pull. If there are deep roots, they're not even going to try to pull the plant. And so when you're bringing somebody, a Gen Z, into your organization, are you looking for a worker, or are you wanting that person in your organization? And how does your relationship or your interaction with them reflect that? This is just a guess, so I don't hear me judging you, because I literally do not know. But if you are having a hard time retaining Gen Z, could it be that you see them as workers that are necessary rather than individuals that you want? If that makes sense? And are you putting forth the time and effort to build into that relationship because you care about them? I think the end result will be retention, but that shouldn't be the purpose, is to retain. The purpose should be that you care about the individual. And I think that'll go far.
Well, and I'll add to that. I mean, Justin, you and I have spent hours and hours talking about this in general, not necessarily just Gen Z, but I think as I was listening to your presentation and again visiting some of our conversations that have been ongoing for years, it seems to be there's a difference between, and we know this, and I think everyone would go, of course, but I don't know that we live this out. There's a difference between leading people and managing people. And so I think sometimes a lot of these things fall under the umbrella of we manage people and we manage a process, but when we truly lead people, there's such a reciprocal kind of relationship when you're a leader as opposed to when you're managing people. And so again, that's not a silver bullet. You may be a good leader and still have a hard time retaining people, but I think it might be easier. So that might be something you look into. You know, Simon Sinek does a great job of talking about leading the next generation and how to be leaders and not just managers. He's got a lot of great resources. But yeah, I think everything you said is great. But that's kind of what keeps coming up in my mind is, do they feel like they're being managed and they're just, again, if they're just a cog on the machine, then that gets tired and it gets, you grind them down. But if they realize that they're without them, that whole machine doesn't even work. That's a whole different process.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Completely.
So let's finish with this one, and this is a good one. And we we could probably spend some time on this. But how do you speak to this generation about God's work to the nations when they're so passionate about issues here at home? You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. $1 million question. And this is my take on it. Once again, tool, not a silver bullet. If you are talking to, we're going to make a couple of assumptions here. If you are talking to a Gen Z that is a follower of Christ, this is kind of my recommendation on it. If they are more concerned with social justice here than they are, with unreached people groups there, you could be talking about a couple different instances. One, and maybe they're just not called to go overseas, and you're not everybody that you talk to is going to be, and so we can't treat them as though they are. And we need people that are going to, stand up for what we would call human rights, what I would call the image of God, and that's necessary. At the same time, could it be that their understanding of, and I'm not saying that it is, but could it be that their understanding of the Great Commission, the Matthew 24:14, Revelation 7:9, I mean, all these key texts is limited, that it's not seen in its fruition. I work stateside. I do not feel called to go overseas. I mean, if God calls me, I'll go, but I just haven't felt that. I haven't. That just hasn't been a stirring in me. But the reason that I work for an overseas organization, and the reason that I invest my time, my energy into missions and reaching the unreached, the reason that I don't work for corporate America, the reason that I get paid very little, and if you're on here and you work for a ministry organization, you know what I'm talking about. The reason that I raise support rather than go and get a corporate job or something that pays an exceptional amount of money or something of that nature is because I want to see Christ return, and I want that sooner rather than later. And I know that there are a lot of things in our society that are really not okay, that the image of God is not, in all of us throughout our society, is not being treated correctly, that there are people that are marginalized, that there are, there are a lot of good social justice things that need to take place. There is that need. However, when Christ returns, all those will be solved. Things will be made right again. Things are not the way that they ought to be because of the fallen nature of the world, and not necessarily one person's specific sin, but just sin. That it's still, the earth is still in, birthing pains. And our society, both in Western America and just in the world in general, feels that disconnect from the original design and from glory. And we are living in that really, really bad in between of how it was made to be and how it will be. And us solving social justice problems is a band-aid on, a gushing wound. But taking the gospel to people who've never heard it before, when the gospel of the kingdom has been taken to the ends of the earth, then the end will come. Paraphrasing Matthew 24:14, right? If that's the case, and I do, like, I want social justice things to be made right. I just don't want to spin my wheels doing something that in 60 years is going to happen again in some form or fashion. Like, keep in mind, and I know I'm not trying to convince you guys that this is the reality, but this is something that we got to keep in mind when we're talking to Gen Z who are very interested in social justice. It was 60 years ago that the civil rights movement took place. 60 years ago. That's not that long ago. And it didn't solve the problems. It solved some, and then others arose. Because we're dealing with broken people day in and day out. Broken people are dealing with broken people. And so you get broken societies, you get broken justice systems, you get broken, everything's broken, everything's broken. We can't fix those, like actually fix them. There's only one that can. And there are over 3.1 billion people in the world who have never heard of this guy who can fix that. And until that's done, things will still stay broken. So do you want to fix the problem? They need to hear the gospel. The gospel of the kingdom has to go to the ends of the earth. Nowhere in scripture does it say that when a society is made right when it comes to social justice, then the end will come. That Jesus will return and all things will be made right. Nowhere does it say that. It'd be cool if it did, I guess, but it doesn't. What it says is that when the gospel of the kingdom goes to the ends of the earth, and there are people that just simply haven't heard because no one is going. You want to fix problems here? Take the gospel there. It's not going to happen tomorrow, just like social justice isn't going to fix it today. Well, actually, it may happen tomorrow. I don't know. God didn't give me a timeline. But social justice isn't going to fix the problem today. Tomorrow's not looking too good either. A week later isn't looking too good either. However, we do know what does fix it. And that is the gospel of kingdom going to the ends of the earth. So you want to have an impact, you want to change the world, that's how we do it. We bring the gospel so that God is worshiped to the ends of the earth, that he receives the glory that he is due. Once again, this is me. I think you can tell I'm kind of, I'm a bit impassioned. If you are too about this, and for the people that are on here, I hope that you are. I think that's contagious. And the reason that I think that's contagious is because that's what Jesus called us to do. And not alone. I think it's contagious because it's the Spirit of God moving inside of us, right? The Great Commission, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Remember the very end, I am with you always. So if he's with us and we're serious about this, then I think that the Spirit of God inside of us stirs our hearts, our souls, our minds, and our bodies to participate in what God is doing. If Gen Z understands that, if we can help them to see that, once again, I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't think that solves everything. But I think that that is how we uncover those that are called to go. We uncover our laborers that are meant to go into a cross-cultural setting. And some won't be interested, and some will be interested in social justice. And you know what? Lord keep you, bless you, may his face shine upon you. God bless. I hope that works out well, but I know what ultimately works.
Yeah, and I think that if you've been around 1615 for longer than 30 seconds, we talk about this often. You know, you look at the data, even from the recent Barna study, Gen Z kind of has a skeptical look at missions and just kind of overall skepticism when it comes to global missions, cross-cultural evangelism, a number of different things. But we say this often, that we don't do missions well because we're not thinking about missions well. We're not thinking about missions well because we haven't been taught about missions well. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to some of us, that at least those of us that work in this field of mobilization, that the younger people are hesitant to get involved in mobilization because they're not being taught about global missions and cross-cultural at a large scale. And so something that I remember I attended a webinar with Cafe1040 years ago, and something that Stephen Byerly on staff said was the reason why the next generation is not being drawn into global missions is because the church is failing to cast a clear and compelling vision for the next generation. And that has stuck with me for years. But you know who is casting a clear and compelling vision? Social justice organizations. You want to change the world? Here's the problem. Here's how you can do it, and you can start tomorrow. The church is not saying the problem is 3.1 billion people have not heard of Christ. You want to change the world? Here's how you can do it. Let's help you. You can start tomorrow. We're not doing that, and so there's a big disconnect there. So, well, Justin and I can continue this conversation for hours, as we have many, many times, but we want to let you guys go. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for being here today. Again, Rebecca and Savannah are going to continue this conversation. They're going to draw in some of this Barna data that they have been working on, and that conversation will continue in October. But we're super excited that you were able to join us, and this again, this recording will be up in the next week or so on our YouTube channel or on our website. So thanks for coming, everybody, and we will see you next time.